Congratulations, Dad. You just signed the most expensive document of your life.
Shall we proceed with the review then?
Congratulations, Dad. You just signed the most expensive document of your life. I said those words on a Tuesday morning in November, standing in the back of a conference room that I had walked into 1,000 times before. A room where I had closed deals, shaken hands with investors, and built something from nothing with my own bare hands. But on that particular Tuesday, I was not at the head of the table. I was standing against the back wall, arms crossed, watching my father sign his name to a document that was supposed to erase me. My brother Marcus was sitting right beside him, smiling like a man who had just won the lottery. My uncle Gerald was across the table, nodding with that slow, deliberate satisfaction of someone who believed the game was already over. And maybe, from where they were sitting, it really did look like it was. The company they were restructuring me out of had my fingerprints on every single brick of its foundation. Every client relationship, every vendor contract, every growth strategy that had taken us from a 2-room office in Columbus, Ohio, to a $30 million regional powerhouse. That was me. But none of that was in the document my father was signing. None of that was being honored in that room. What was in that document was a clean, corporate-sounding phrase called a voluntary restructuring exit. And what that phrase was designed to do was push me out the door quietly, cheaply, and permanently, without ever having to say the word fired. But here is what my father did not know. Here is what Marcus did not know. Here is what none of them had bothered to read carefully in their rush to get me out. There was another document, and it was going to change everything. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, to understand what happened in that room and why it mattered the way that it did, you have to go back, not all the way to childhood, not to some sentimental story about a little boy helping his father stack boxes in a warehouse. We do not have time for that, and honestly, that story is not the one that matters here. What matters is the moment the betrayal became visible, the moment I stopped asking questions and started looking for answers on my own. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, about 6 weeks before that November meeting. I had been noticing small things for months. Expenses that did not quite line up. Vendor invoices that had been approved without going through our standard authorization process. A company credit card that Marcus had been using for what the ledger described as business development travel. I almost let it go. I almost told myself it was a rounding error, a clerical mistake, the kind of accounting slippage that happens in any growing company. But then I saw the photo. It was not posted publicly, which made it worse. A mutual contact had sent it to me, almost as a joke, almost as a, "Hey, did you know about this?" kind of thing. And there was Marcus, standing on the beach in Cabo San Lucas, with his girlfriend and 2 of his college friends, all of them holding drinks with little umbrellas in them, grinning like men without a single care in the world. And underneath the photo, Marcus had written the caption, "Finally taking what we deserve." That trip, I later confirmed through our own company records, had been charged in full to the business. The flights, the hotel, the excursions, the restaurant tabs, all of it coded under Q3 client entertainment. But there was no client, there was no entertainment. There was only my brother on a beach that I had paid for, celebrating something I did not yet fully understand. I started pulling receipts, and the deeper I went, the colder the room felt. It was not just the Cabo trip. It was a pattern stretching back nearly 18 months. Dinners coded as board meetings for restaurants that did not even have private dining rooms large enough for a board. Equipment purchases for a warehouse branch we had never opened. A consulting retainer paid monthly to a company I had never heard of, which, when I finally traced it, turned out to be registered to Gerald's son-in-law. I took everything I found to a forensic accountant. She looked at the documents for about 40 minutes before she looked up at me and said, very quietly, "You have a serious problem." I said, "I know." She said, "No, I mean they have a serious problem, and they do not know it yet." That was when the plan began. They thought I was the family's charity case. They had spent years treating me like the one who needed to be managed, the one who was too emotional, too idealistic, too attached to the company to see it clearly. They had built a narrative around me that made them comfortable. And they had gotten so comfortable inside that narrative that they never once stopped to ask the most important question a person can ask before they made their move. They never asked what I already knew, and they absolutely never asked what I had already done about it. So let us go back to that Tuesday, back to that conference room, back to my father's hand moving across the signature line at the bottom of the voluntary restructuring exit agreement. I had been quiet the entire meeting. I had let their attorney do the talking. I had let Marcus lay out the rationale, which he did with the practiced smoothness of someone who had rehearsed it enough times that he had started to believe his own performance. The language they used was careful: business evolution, optimizing leadership structure, ensuring the company's long-term sustainability. Every phrase had been chosen to make what they were doing sound reasonable, inevitable, even generous. They even had a number attached to it, a final payout figure that was supposed to make me feel like I was being treated fairly. It was not a large number. It was the kind of number that is designed to feel just large enough that you might take it without asking too many questions. And that was the tell. That was the moment I knew with complete certainty that none of them had read the full contract. Not the one from 5 years earlier. Not the employment agreement that had been drafted when the company crossed the $10 million revenue threshold and our original attorney had insisted, over Marcus's objections, I now recalled, that executive-level contracts needed to be restructured to reflect the company's new valuation. Not the agreement that contained Section 12.4. I reached into the leather folder I had brought with me. I set a second copy of a contract on the table. I slid it toward my father slowly, the way you would slide a card across a poker table when you already know what everyone else is holding. I said, "See this clause? Section 12.4. You call it a standard exit. My lawyer calls it a golden parachute." The room went very, very quiet. Marcus looked at the document. Then he looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at their attorney. Their attorney picked up the document, found Section 12.4, and I watched the color leave his face with the speed and efficiency of someone pulling a plug from a drain. Because here is what Section 12.4 said, in the plainest legal language you have ever read. If any executive with a vested equity stake of 15% or more is removed from an operational role without documented cause, the company is required to issue a severance package equal to 3 times the executive's highest annual compensation in the preceding 5 years, plus reimbursement of any provably withheld bonuses, plus the immediate vesting of all outstanding equity shares at current valuation. 3 times, plus withheld bonuses, plus immediate equity vesting. My father looked up from the document. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone when he is trying to figure out if what he is seeing is real. I met his eyes. I did not blink. I said, "Dad, I need you to understand something. I have been waiting 6 weeks for this meeting. Now here is where it gets important, because I want you to understand exactly how this worked, not in abstract terms, not in the kind of vague justice was served language that makes for a satisfying headline, but leaves you with no real understanding of what actually happened. I want you to understand the mechanics. I want you to see the architecture, because the architecture is the point. When our original employment contracts were drawn up back in the early days of the company, Marcus had insisted on a relatively informal arrangement. Handshake-level stuff, minimal documentation. He liked it that way because informal arrangements are easier to reinterpret later, easier to bend, easier to use against someone if you decide, years down the road, that you want them gone. But when the company crossed that $10 million revenue mark, our attorney at the time, a woman named Patricia Calloway, who had been practicing business law in Columbus for over 30 years, sat us all down and told us in no uncertain terms that we needed real contracts. Binding contracts. Contracts that reflected the actual equity stakes, the actual roles, and the actual legal protections that executives at a company of our size were entitled to. Marcus had pushed back. He had said it was unnecessary. He had said it was overcomplicating something that did not need to be complicated. But Patricia had been firm, and my father, who still trusted Patricia's judgment in those days, had sided with her. And so the contracts were signed. All of them, including mine, including Section 12.4. Now, here is the part that I need you to sit with for a moment, because this is the part that keeps me up at night even now, not out of regret, but out of something closer to awe at how completely their own greed had constructed the trap they walked into. Every dollar that Marcus had been routing through the company as personal expenses, the Cabo trip, the dinners, the warehouse equipment that never existed, the consulting retainer paid to Gerald's son-in-law, every single one of those dollars was legally classifiable as a diversion of company resources that should have been allocated to executive compensation. In other words, every dollar they took from the business for themselves was, by the terms of our operating agreement, a dollar that had been effectively stolen from the compensation pool. And under Section 12.4, any documented instance of withheld or improperly diverted compensation could be added to the severance calculation at the time of an involuntary exit. My forensic accountant had spent 6 weeks building that calculation. She had not rushed it. She had been methodical, document by document, receipt by receipt, vendor invoice by vendor invoice. And when she handed me the final number, I had to read it twice. Not because I could not believe the math, because I could not believe they had been so careless. The total severance obligation triggered by Section 12.4, once you factored in the 3 times compensation multiplier, the withheld bonus reimbursement, the immediate equity vesting at current valuation, and the provably diverted compensation amounts that had been documented by my forensic accountant, came to just under $4.2 million. $4.2 million, owed to me, by the company, legally, without any ability to dispute it, because every single piece of evidence had been compiled with the kind of precision that courtrooms are designed for. Now, I want you to stop for a second. I want you to feel what I felt when I realized that their greed had literally handed me the keys to their own bank account. Because when I say I almost felt bad for them, I mean I sat with that number for about 30 seconds, and I genuinely considered the version of this story where I walked away quietly. I thought about it. I thought about my father's face. I thought about the years we had spent building something together. I thought about whether the relationship was worth more than the money. And then I thought about Marcus, on that beach in Cabo, with his little umbrella drink. I thought about Gerald's son-in-law cashing monthly retainer checks for consulting work that had never happened. I thought about the Tuesday morning they had put a payout number on the table that was designed to make me feel just grateful enough to sign away everything without reading the fine print. When I realized their greed had literally handed me the keys to their bank accounts, I almost felt bad. Almost. Would you have let them keep a single cent? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. What happened next did not take long. When you have a well-prepared attorney, a forensic accountant with 6 weeks of documented evidence, and a legally binding contract that the other side signed without ever fully reading, the timeline tends to compress. Within 48 hours of that Tuesday morning, my legal team had sent a formal demand letter to the company's registered address, to Marcus, to Gerald, and to their attorney, outlining the full scope of the Section 12.4 obligation and the evidentiary basis for the withheld compensation claims. The letter was 14 pages long. Their attorney called mine the same afternoon. He used the word significant 17 times. He was not wrong. The following Monday, I walked back into that building one more time, not because I had to, not because there was anything left for me to do there operationally. I walked back in because the terms of the settlement negotiation required a final in-person meeting, and I had decided that I wanted to be present when that meeting happened. I wanted to sit at the head of the table, not out of cruelty, not out of some cinematic desire for a dramatic moment, but because that table had been mine first, and I thought it was important, for my own sake, that I close that chapter in the same room where they had tried to end it. When I walked in, Marcus was already there. He did not look like the man who had been grinning on a beach in Cabo 2 months earlier. He looked like someone who had not slept in a week, which, from what I later heard, was accurate. Gerald was there too, sitting with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, doing the thing that powerful men do when they are losing, and they do not have the grace to admit it yet, performing composure. Their attorney had 2 associates with him. My attorney had one. The discrepancy was not lost on anyone in the room. What happened over the next 4 hours was not a fight. It was not a screaming match. It was not the kind of confrontation you see in movies where chairs get pushed back and voices get raised, and someone storms out of the room. It was methodical. It was document by document. It was our forensic accountant presenting her findings, line by line, and their attorney sitting across the table, with the specific stillness of a man who has already accepted a conclusion he does not want to speak out loud yet. My father sat at the far end of the table. He did not say much. At one point, about 2 hours into the meeting, he looked at me from across all those documents and spreadsheets and legal briefs, and I saw something in his face that I had not expected to see. It was not anger. It was not defiance. It was grief. And I understood that grief, because I felt it too, just sitting inside a different version of it. Because the truth is, what Marcus and Gerald had done had not only cost the company $4.2 million, it had cost our family something that no settlement agreement and no dollar amount could ever fully put back. It had cost us the story we had told ourselves about who we were. But that was their debt to carry, not mine. By the end of that 4th hour, a settlement framework had been agreed upon. The company would honor the full Section 12.4 obligation. The withheld compensation claims would be paid in full. My equity shares would vest immediately at the agreed valuation. And a separate confidential agreement addressed the forensic accountant's findings regarding the diverted company funds. Findings that, had they been escalated rather than settled, would have carried consequences far more serious than a financial settlement. The combined payout effectively zeroed out the company's operating reserve, which meant that the business Marcus and Gerald had tried to protect by pushing me out was now in the precarious financial position that their own behavior had created. I did not create that outcome. Their choices did. I simply made sure that when the math was finally done, it was done correctly, and it was done completely. I walked out of that building at approximately 6:15 in the evening. The parking lot was mostly empty. The November air was cold and clean and very still. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started it. Not because I was celebrating, not because I was crying, but because I needed a moment to be alone with the simple, quiet fact of what had just happened. They had tried to restructure me out of something I built. They had tried to use my own company's paperwork against me. They had signed a document that Tuesday morning, believing it would erase me quietly and cheaply and permanently. And what they had actually done, what their greed and their carelessness and their absolute certainty that I would not fight back had caused them to do, was hand me a legal instrument worth $4.2 million that I had been holding in my briefcase the entire time they were talking. I did not walk out of that building as a failure. I did not walk out as a cautionary tale or a family casualty, or a man who had been broken by people who were supposed to love him. I walked out as the architect. I had always been the architect. They just forgot that the architect keeps a copy of every blueprint, and blueprints, as it turns out, are admissible in court. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if somewhere in the back of your mind you thought about a time when someone underestimated you, when someone looked right past you and assumed you would not fight back, then you already know why this story needed to be told. Because the world is full of Marcuses, the world is full of Geralds, and the world is full of conference rooms, where someone is sitting at the back wall, quiet, watching a document get signed, already knowing something that nobody else in the room has figured out yet. The question is never whether the truth comes out. The question is always whether you are prepared when it does. If you made it to the end of this video, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button, because it tells us that stories like this one matter to you, and it helps us reach the people who need to hear them most. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because we are just getting started, and the stories we have coming are going to be unlike anything you have seen before. Drop a comment below and tell us, would you have taken the quiet payout and walked away, or would you have stayed and fought? I genuinely want to know where you stand. Share this video with someone in your life who is going through something hard right now. Someone who needs to be reminded that being underestimated is not a weakness. It is a setup. We will see you in the next one.